What's going on, everybody? My name's Ryan from Reddit Voice, and today we're going to be looking at some more of the #1 stories on r/ProRevenge. But before we do, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to stay up to date on all the latest videos. Mike finds a way to get rid of a problem employee. This revenge wasn't mine, but I figured I'd share as I was witness to the beginning. Certain names and details changed to protect the guilty. Background. Years back, I worked for a large bank in the UK. We all worked on the same floor and in the same department, but within different teams. I was just passing through on a secondment and saw the beginning of this revenge, but was filled in on the aftermath later. One of the terms was run by a woman called Sarah. Sarah was by many measures a good manager, but she had a blind spot. The blind spot was a woman called Helen. Now, when I was in my previous role, I interacted with Helen a fair bit, and she seemed kinda friendly. But when it came to actually working with her, she was a nightmare. She'd tattle, steal ideas, and credit, and generally throw you under the bus at any opportunity. I'm not sure why Sarah always protected her, but it soon became a sore point for most people on the floor who had to deal with her. Enter Mike, who was the manager of a smaller team. Mike could be a bit of a dick, but was still professional and fun to work with. To give you an idea of his character, I found out I was being made redundant, and even though he wasn't my manager, he heard about it and booked time out to help me with my CV and do interview practice. Shortly after it was announced that Mike's smaller team was being dissolved and the staff either made redundant or moved to other teams at the time of the cuts, the economy in the UK was in a bad state and all the banks were looking for efficiencies. He was redeployed and took the vacant manager role under Sarah that Helen had been gunning for. To make matters worse, Helen now reported directly to him. Helen was furious and spent no time in making her discontent known, as she felt she was entitled to the promotion. Unfortunately for her, Mike was wise to her. They'd both joined the company around the same time, and so he knew exactly what she was like. He'd even had her blame him for mistakes before. Even the projects she'd gotten so much praise for had been work on one of his staff had been doing. So he started the process of documenting her poor work and attitude to manage her out of the business. Sarah, however, would not allow it. Helen was a high performer in her eyes, and she wouldn't sign off on getting rid of her. When I left the team, Mike was frustrated with her and wasn't sure what to do. The revenge. I met up with Mike a year later, and he shared how he'd solved the Helen problem with me because he knows all of the issues I'd had with her. Because Sarah had his hands tied, his only other option to get Helen out of the team was for her to leave of her own accord. He couldn't oust her by making her life difficult, or she'd go to Sarah. So he went the other way. This mother effer sat through every performance meeting with her, for the rest of the year gritting his teeth and praising her. That then justified him giving her a really high performance rating. He also used his own contacts to find roles in other teams at his grade, and he then talked up to Helen. These roles were specifically selected because they specialized in one of the things Helen claimed she was an expert at, but had very little real experience in. Basically roles where he knew she'd have the highest chance of shitting the bed. Eventually, she applied for one, and he spent several weeks coaching her for the interview. In the company at the time, the interviews were scored off of 3 main factors: performance rating in current role, competency based on interview results, relevant experiences. He'd done everything he could to make her shine in all 3. She took the promotion and within 2 months had quit. She knew that she wasn't ready for the responsibility, didn't have the skills, and her poor work ethic would be exposed. Worst case, she'd get her shit together and still look like the perfect manager to Sarah. Too long didn't read. Upon finding out he couldn't fire the problem employee, manager gets her promoted to a team where she'll either get fired or quit. You threaten my job, I take yours. I'm a huge fan of this sub, and I'm excited to share my story and add the boiling pot of sweet revenge. This happened last year. I was about 6 months into a food service job at the time. I worked in my university's cafeteria, prepping and serving food to the students. After closing, I took about 45 minutes to finish cleaning up my station and took another 10 to finish up one of my co-workers' stations that she needed a bit of help with. My supervisor had just left after closing and to God knows where, leaving the rest of us to our devices as he usually did. He was more the watch and rule type. After I finished, I took a quick 5-minute trip to the bathroom as I usually did around this time every day, as I happily walked to the back to assist in helping the others finish so we could all leave. I heard a cough behind me, the sound of the calm before the storm. I ignore it, thinking nothing of it, and go on my way. I hear a more abrupt and I stop and turn on my heel to my shift supervisor's cold gaze. His hands crossed over his puffed chest in his regular stance. I give him a questioning look as he looks on, expecting me to read his mind. "A half an hour?" he asks calmly, but with a sour tinge to his tone. Huh? This was apparently the worst thing I could have done. "You were in the bathroom for half an hour," he yelled, stomping his royal foot. That wasn't really a yell, but I was taken aback as he had never come at me with a sideways tone before. Sorry, I ruined the effect. I thought we were cool, but I should have known better seeing how he treated my coworkers. I was so shocked I just stood there staring at him like he grew 3 horns. I didn't feel the need to defend myself in a moment, as I knew the words he was spitting in my face were pure BS. "Do you like your job?" he demanded from me. I did not, in fact, like my job. I had trouble holding back my smile as this thought, as he yelled some more things I don't remember, as my ears had gone numb to his screeching at this point. Sorry guys, the formatting's a little weird on this one. I knew he had no power to fire me, and I hadn't even seen his mug for the past hour. I knew his words had no consequence. I had nothing to say to his tantrum, and as soon as he realized that, he dismissed me. I have trouble egging people on when they are being so irrational, so generally I stay quiet and let them get out their baby fit. I quickly went back to work and started scheming about how I could get back at this man. Over the next week, I compiled photo evidence of him slacking on the job, serving undercooked food, and statements from my coworkers about their individual experiences where he ridiculed or threatened them, and I took it straight to my boss that Friday. I laid out all of my evidence and personal encounter, which they would be able to check in the cameras and identify both of our whereabouts that day and could see who truly was off duty for a half an hour. I don't think much would come of it, but I was relatively new as a worker and honestly didn't care about anything that happened to that hellhole. I let it slip from my mind for that weekend. The next Monday, I come in before most and start setting up. After a while, the general manager comes out of the back with a supervisor following her like a puppy, staring at his feet. He walks up sheepishly to me and invites me to sit with him at one of the tables in the cafeteria, where he admits to me that he was in the wrong, shouldn't have yelled at me like that, should be a better leader, is in super duper sorry, all that yada yada. I sat there with the biggest grin on my face as he practically groveled at my feet begging for forgiveness, as his boss watched on. The man that sat so high on his horse for the past 6 months. I watched on in celebration as he then apologized to each of my coworkers individually. Not but a week later, he was demoted to a backroom cook and I had been given the role of shift supervisor. We never had a problem after that, and he was a generally okay guy. I hope he really did learn his lesson and didn't say all those things just to get it over with. Either way, this was the sweetest revenge of my life. I have since quit that job and work for a company with people who actually know how to respect others as individuals, whether their position is below or above their own. Thank you, I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed watching it happen. The Girl Friday, with the PhD, takes over the business from an ungrateful owner. This is a long tale. It is also a textbook case of why you don't abuse loyal associates. My spouse was the second person hired at a consulting company in a very specialized industry. In her 15 years with the firm, it grew to a respectable 3-office, 8 to 10 employees at each entity. She and the owner grew the business on the contacts, expertise, and presentations of my wife, to the extent that my wife's abilities and education were the main reason the new business came through the door. Over the years, her scope of responsibility grew so that the owner was basically 75% absent and mostly unaware of day-to-day activity. As he got more and more removed from the business, he would make overtures that he would eventually retire and sell the business. He was so dependent on her income generating that he took out a life insurance policy on her. I didn't involve myself too much, but at a major industry dinner party I attended with her, I introduced my wife to the table as my Girl Friday, basically a secretary, which was weird. Over the years she tried to get an agreement in place to buy the firm, even if it was years away. He always delayed and made promises, but never followed through. I told her, this guy doesn't respect you or your contributions. He will never sell you the business because there's no reason to. He can make more money on you by stringing you along, and essentially, you are the business. Why would he sell it to you? One day out of the blue, my wife received a raise and a bonus, a very minor amount of money, and a contract that included a non-compete, non-disclosure agreement. After reading it, she realized that the owner was trying to lock her down from leaving for another firm. She had been getting feelers from other companies. To make things even more suspicious, she received a call from a competitor who said they were in the final stages of due diligence and they wanted to meet her. The a-hole was selling the company and didn't think to tell her or ask if she was interested in buying it. She ignored the agreement and there were no other agreements in place. She was totally free. My wife is extremely loyal. She has missed so many special days working for this guy. Stuck around when there were wobbly, even skipped paychecks, and then when there were tough financial times. She was furious, the absolute maddest I've ever seen her. We discussed starting her own firm and I asked how much business is contractually obligated to stay there if you leave. It turned out that most agreements were either handshakes or 30-day at will. I also asked how many would leave with you. She said about 75%, including our biggest resource of revenue, who didn't even know the owner. In a very short time, my wife took a 3-week vacation. She had months of unused time, during which she rented an office in the same building and made all the arrangements to set up a new shop. She agreed to leave any and all company property behind and do her best to give the old company no obvious ammo for litigation. She called her clients and said, "I'm leaving. If you want to relocate your account with my new company, you'll need to quit the old one before we can discuss it." Most understood the implication. While she was on vacation, she received a panicked call from her boss. "We lost XYZ company. Do you know anything about it?" She said, "I'm sorry, but I just sent you an email. I've resigned. All my keys and company stuff is on my desk. Bye-bye." The new firm took basically 90% of the business and seamlessly transitioned into the same company as it was before, but with a new owner. Even most of the office staff would come aboard. Within a year, her old company closed down except for a small office her old boss ran. She sees him once in a while and he just scowls at her. Height approved. I originally posted this on Malicious Compliance, but I think it belongs here too. This isn't my story, but my parents'. It was probably the first time I witnessed Malicious Compliance, and I still remember it well. It was about 25 years ago, so I was about 8, and we had just moved to a 150-year-old house that was in need of major repairs. My dad, thinking ahead, knew he would need a large garage/workshop to really get started on the renovations properly. On the edge of our yard was an ancient barn that was falling apart and needed to be torn down. My dad figured this was the best place to build his new workshop, so that was the plan. We had met and were on good terms with all the neighbors at that point. When the plans for the new workshop were finished, my parents went around to all the neighbors as a courtesy to show them the plans and get their blessings. The neighbor whose property the current barn and new workshop would border, I'll call them the Peters, were concerned about the height. The existing barn was 16 feet high, and they asked if we could build it 1 story, 12 feet max, as to not block the sun in their yard. Sure, no problem, my parents agreed, as they wanted to go 2 stories for extra storage, but 1 wasn't a deal breaker. So the old barn was torn down and the foundation laid on the new one. During that time, there was a falling out with the Peters and my parents. I'm not sure what happened, but it turned nasty. One day, my brother and I were playing street hockey, and Mr. Peters came out yelling at us, "Get off the road, you half-breed shits." My dad's black, so we're both half black. You have to earn your place in this town. Upon hearing this, my mom had to physically restrain my dad from going over there and beating the crap out of them. Eventually, he cooled off and started on his plan. The plans for 1 story went out the window. Soon the new garage that was only supposed to be 1 story soon gained a second in the blueprints. If they were going to direct racist comments at his kids, my dad would build what he wanted. As the construction started, the Peters came over to ask why there was 2 stories being built, and were told to go F themselves. We didn't hear from them again until the roof started to go on. The bylaws of township limited all-out structures to 24 feet high. The Peters called the township and then a building inspector, claiming that the new garage was over 24 feet high. If it was over the height, the entire thing would have to be torn down and rebuilt, costing us tens of thousands of dollars. I remember the Peters standing there watching the inspector with smug looks on their faces. 2 days later, and we got the final report back from the township and inspector. 23 feet, 11 inches, just as my dad had drawn up in his new plans. He sent me the roof of the garage, just plywood, no singles yet, with some spray paint, and had me write 23 feet, 11 inches, height approved, in 2-foot neon orange letters across the entire roof facing their yard and house. Not only did the garage block all sunlight from reaching their yard, but my dad waited until everything else was done before he shingled that side of the roof. They had to stare at those neon orange letters for almost 3 years. We didn't hear a peep from them for the next 10 years until they moved. And that brings us to the end of today's video. Did you like it? Make sure to check out some of our other stuff and maybe even subscribe. As always, my name's Ryan from Reddit Voice, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. See ya!